of the Barn of Tomorrow series. A couple great presenters to talk to you today. We have Chris Clark. He's out of the Southwest Iowa area, and he's a beef specialist, and he's going to get us introduced on the topic of camera technologies for calving monitoring. And then Tony Mensing, ag engineer in Southwest Iowa, will help us out understanding a little bit more of that technology and possibilities. So a big, once again, thanks for joining. Excited to have you here for our fourth edition. And with that, I'll let Chris take over and walk us through some of what he's seen for camera and calving monitoring. So thanks for joining us today, Chris.
Thank you, Dan, for the introduction, and thanks for having me. Um, so we'll dive right in here. We want to talk today about the use of camera technology on beef operations, and I've listed here a few potential applications for the use of cameras on beef farms. I think we could do lots of different things with cameras, including heat detection, monitoring feeding habits and behavior. There's probably some health management things we could do with cameras. Um, I listed simply security here. Cattle are incredibly valuable right now. And so could we enhance our security by strategically kind of placing cameras at certain gates or driveways or observing certain pens? But round out this list here with calving, and that's where we're going to kind of focus today. Um, that's where I've seen cameras used most often on beef operations is to observe the calving process, especially for monitoring heifers. So to start with, we're going to do a really brief review of the three stages of labor. And this kind of helps as I drive home the points of kind of why and how cameras can be useful to help with observation of calving. So stage one is when the fetus is in the birth canal, the cervix starts to dilate, uterine contractions begin, and they could be relatively mild and far apart at this point. The cattle may become nervous, anxious, uncomfortable. Sometimes cows will try to isolate themselves from the herd, and they may be kind of up and down, trying to get comfortable and trying to kind of figure out what's happening. And then average duration of stage one is usually described as 2 to 6 hours, 4 hours on average, and typically it will not go longer than 8 hours in a normal birthing process. So this just kind of elaborates a little bit on stage one. So at the beginning of stage one, the cervix is going to be closed. And then if we go to the upper right here, as we progress with some hormone influence and with just physical pressure from the uterine contractions pushing that fetus up into the birth canal, the cervix will dilate gradually. And then down here in the lower right, we're looking at kind of the end of stage one, beginning of stage two, usually marked by the presentation and rupture of the water bag and hopefully fetal extremities, hopefully front feet presenting first. Stage two is really where all the action happens. So that's going to be presentation and rupture of the water bag to start stage two. We see fetal extremities, hopefully front feet and the tip of the nose presenting first. And this is going to be what they call active labor, characterized by abdominal straining or abdominal press. So at this point, the uterine contractions get more intense and more frequent. And typically with each contraction, the cow is going to push along with that uterine contraction. Now, historically here, the average duration of stage two has been described as like 2 to 4 hours, but there is some research out there from several years ago that suggests a shorter duration for stage two. And in this particular study that I referenced, they found that a more reasonable duration for stage two would be even as short as 23 minutes for cows and 55 minutes for heifers. So not surprising that heifers can take a little bit longer. But in this particular study, they found that many times if a cow went very much longer than 23 minutes, or if a heifer went very much longer than 55 minutes, ultimately those females would need assistance. Stage three would be passage of the placenta. So average duration here is about 6 hours. Placenta is considered retained if it hasn't been passed within 12 hours. So this leads me to some rules of thumb for assistance. And I'm not going to read all of these to you one by one. I'll kind of focus on that bolded point at the bottom of the list. I tend to focus there where if we're truly in active labor, so truly in stage two, and we go 30 to 60 minutes without significant progress, I would like to at least do an exam and see what's happening. So the question is noted below that. If you check your cows or heifers and you kind of get a snapshot in time of what's happening, how well have you been monitoring, and do you really know exactly where we're at in the process? And so, for instance, if you check on a cow and she's in stage two, maybe the water bag's ruptured, feet and tip of the nose are presented, but you may not know exactly how long she's been in stage two or how she's progressed over the last 30 to 60 minutes. And so this is an example of where hopefully camera technology could be helpful. Could you check more frequently and more efficiently and have a better sense of kind of where you're at in the process with what you observe at any given check? So given the virtual format today, I'm going to have you just kind of think about these things on your own. If you happen to be watching with friends and family, you can discuss that, uh, kind of among yourselves. In a face-to-face meeting, this would be a good opportunity for some interaction and some feedback. But I just want you to think a little bit about your own operation and how many cows and heifers actually require assistance at calving. And then how often do you check cows and heifers during calving season? And how much time do you spend checking and monitoring during that season? Do you check during the night? And if so, how frequently and how much time does it take for each night check? And then finally, when you check cows and heifers, do they become distracted at all? Do we sometimes interrupt that process just with our presence? And so as we think about these things, I want to share a little bit of data with you from some national survey work from the USDA. So this would be from the USDA National Animal Health Monitoring System, the 2007-2008 cow-calf survey. And basically they asked producers, of those calves that are born alive but die prior to 3 weeks of age, what is the cause of death? Now, this is from the producer's perspective. They may or may not have a definitive cause of death for many cases, but we're looking at almost 26% that are noted as dying from calving-related problems, almost 26% from weather-related problems, 18.6% that die of unknown causes. And then you've got some infectious diseases, some injuries, possible predation noted to kind of round things out. So I would venture to guess that some of the unknown causes of death, some of the infectious diseases and injuries would go back to calving related and weather related problems. And so to me, that really speaks to the point that if we do a good job of managing the calving process, and if we can protect those neonatal calves from weather extremes, we should be able to save a tremendous number of calves. And again, especially in today's market, that brings great value. So this is some additional data from the 2017-2018 USDA NOMS survey. And here they're looking a little bit at how many females required assistance at calving time, and then how often are producers checking those calving females. So respondents indicated here that approximately 10% of heifers required assistance and approximately 4% of cows required assistance. 93.2% of operations monitored heifers on a regular basis, and 89% of operations monitored cows on a regular basis. Now, they defined on a regular basis here as simply some kind of a checking or monitoring schedule that's more structured than just haphazard checking. That's kind of how they worded it. And then the last set of information at the bottom of the slide here kind of describes, of those that monitored heifers on a regular basis, how many times a day did they monitor or check those females? So you can see that over half of the operations monitor just one time or two times per day. Okay, two times or less per day. I would argue that's not enough, especially based on the stages of labor that we talked about and the typical duration for stage two, I would like to see producers check more than once or twice per day. We've got almost 21% there that indicated monitoring 5 times or more per day. And when we start talking about those numbers, then we can get into the discussion of how feasible is that? Um, are you able to check 5, 6, 7 times a day among doing the rest of your work and living the rest of your life? And so again, that's where camera technology may become helpful. Can we make it more easy and more efficient to check those females so that you can do it more frequently? As you think about investing into a camera system, there are some things to think about. So one thing is to think about what type of area will you be monitoring? So how big is that area? How many pens are we talking about? How many head are we talking about? And then is this an indoor or an outdoor area? And then I want to spend just a moment here talking about the goals of using a camera system. Excuse me. So maybe you want just a live stream, a very simple live stream only system where you just want the ability to periodically check in. And maybe it's just for doing night checks, so you don't have to get up and get dressed and get out into the cold, but you can log on to the office computer, get that snapshot in time, assess what's happening right now, and then come back and check again in a few hours. With that type of a system, it could be relatively easy and simple to set up. Maybe you're relying on simply home Wi-Fi. Maybe you do a simple, reliable wired system. Really no need for memory or hard drive in that case to save data. I do think there's potential to use the ability to record and play back video footage to actually gain a lot of valuable information. Now, this system would require some extra bells and whistles. It would require a hard drive or some memory. But think about that ability to manage the calving process. If you happen to log on and find a female in stage two of labor, but you don't know exactly how she's been progressing over the last hour or two, could you go back and watch footage from that previous time frame and kind of see exactly where we're at in her calving process? Additionally, I think you could use it for other things like um, checking on if a cow has cleaned. Maybe the placenta is not um, obviously, present. Maybe it's not evident, but you suspect that maybe she has cleaned. Maybe it's hidden in the bedding. Maybe she ate it already. Things like that happen. Maybe we want to know if a cow has, or if a calf, I'm sorry, has nursed. So we want to know if the calf has gotten colostrum. Maybe we want to know how vigorous the calf was when it was born, how quickly it stood, how much it suckled at this point. I think there are things like that that can be really useful and valuable. And that could be an opportunity to use that ability to record and play back previous footage. So the other thing to consider would be, do you want to view this from just inside your home, or do you want more of a true remote accessibility? So perhaps, again, you want help with night checks. You just want to send this to your office computer so you can check periodically through the night right there from your house. That's a relatively simple system. Or maybe you want to go a step further, and while you're at your child's ball game, while you're out to dinner, while you're at church, whatever the case might be, you could just pull up your phone and check your calving pin. And so if we start going down that road, we have to think a little bit more about the software and the apps that would be needed on your phone to pull up the data. We need to think about internet access and how do we get that information to the World Wide Web. So I'm going to round out the presentation here with just a few pictures and kind of think a little bit about camera placement and things like that. This is just an example of a hoop building that they were using to calve some cows in. I think in this setting, it could be relatively straightforward to think about where you might place a camera that works. I will say that even with a pretty simple, small calving area, if you just have one camera, located, let's say, in a corner, in my experience, You can have situations where cows lie facing the camera and you can't really see the business end of what you want to see. And so do you have to then do two cameras at a minimum, kind of opposite corners of the area? Or do we need to have more sophisticated cameras that allow us to do kind of pan, tilt, and zoom and those types of things? The other thing to consider here is that a building like this would tend to be a long, narrow building. You might have multiple calving pins down the length of it. And obviously, at one end of the building, you could place a camera and have a really good view of the close pins. You're probably not going to have a good view of the far end of the building. So, do we need multiple cameras down the length of this? Sky's the limit there. We could do as many cameras as you want to invest in. Beyond just that investment cost, the other thing to think about is having multiple camera feeds to manage. And so, does that become kind of a challenge, kind of a problem more so than a solution if you have to kind of manage through multiple camera feeds? This is showing some outdoor calving areas. Outdoor calving pens and pastures tend to be larger. And so I think there's a bit of a challenge trying to observe that entire area and yet get the detail that you need. So in the lower right, we've got a picture kind of zoomed out where we can see this entire pen, but I can't really see the detail that I need in terms of looking at, you know, the details of the calving process. And so in the upper left, we've zoomed in. This is the same exact calving pen. We've got a better view here of animals a little more up close to where hopefully we could see some detail in terms of kind of where an animal is at in the calving process. So again here, do we need more sophisticated cameras for a big outdoor area where we can do some of that pan and tilt and particularly zoom? So lots of buildings like this are out there in the Midwest. Very simple, older building. It's an open front, so we've got indoor and outdoor areas to manage. How do we set up cameras to be able to view both? Um, we do have a few lights hanging, although it's a very simple building, so there seems to be power. So that's a consideration. Do you have power, or do you have to rely on something like solar? Um, in a situation like this, maybe we want to keep it simple, set up a camera system inside and lock in at night the heifers or the cows that are most close to calving, as opposed to trying to view the entire area. There's lots of different ways that you could manage that. I won't do much with this. Just a quick note here on nighttime observation. Tony will talk more about this, but oftentimes we have to think about lighting if we're viewing cattle overnight, and maybe we need to think about night vision or infrared technology to be able to see good images at night. And then the last thing I would say here is to think about your perspective from that camera placement. So this is an image that I got where it seems that the camera is placed up high, kind of above the center of a pin, and it looks down from above. And I appreciate that. You can get kind of a 360-degree view around the camera. You can get kind of a big, broad picture of a pin, but it's a really unnatural perspective for me, and I can't really see what I want to see in terms of calving process, in terms of anatomy, things like that. I would really, excuse me, much rather have the camera lower at a more natural angle where it's kind of like I'm leaning on the fence looking over into the pin as opposed to looking from up above. And with that, I would be happy to take a couple of questions. I've tried to kind of set the stage here for Tony to talk a little bit more about the specific technology and what's available out there.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Chris. The first question I have for you as we switch presenters here is maybe what percentage of people in your area right now do you think are using some sort of camera monitoring on their maternity pen? Any feel for
Oh
that?
gosh, that's a great question. I couldn't tell you the percentage. If I were to guess, I would say maybe 25, 30%, and that's really shooting from the hip.
Mhm.
I will say, just in interactions with producers, as recently as 10 years ago, I thought of this as a little bit more of a new thing, a novelty. More and more, I talk to people who do have the technology. I was at a meeting the other night where we only had a handful of people there, but I would say half of the people present talked about their camera systems and how they used them, and most were very positive about being happy with the investment.
Awesome. And Tony, go ahead and start sharing. Just to follow up on that, I grew up in a two-story farmhouse and lived upstairs. And I had a daughter about 4 years ago now. And my wife was like, we needed a camera in her room, a little owlet. And I cannot believe how much we use that app and still use it just to monitor what's going on. And it made me think very differently about my experience on the dairy farm, where it was going out and checking cows and looking at them after the calf was born. And like you, I sort of thought, this that sounds neat, but I don't feel like I need it to. When I used it with my daughter, I'm like, oh, I could see all sorts of uses for this now.
Yeah, for sure.
Thanks so much, Chris. If you do have any more questions for Chris, feel free to get them in the chat and we'll make sure he addresses them at the end. Otherwise, Tony, looking forward to hearing what you have to say, and the floor is yours.
All right, you can see my screen.
Yes, it looks perfect.
Okay, great. First off, I appreciate the opportunity, Dan, and appreciate everybody logging on for the webinar today. So, um, like Dan already mentioned, my name's Tony Mensing. I'm the field agricultural engineer with Extension and Outreach in Southwest Iowa. And Chris did a really nice job of getting us set up and hopefully people thinking about how camera technologies can fit into lots of different operations. This is the same image that Chris just had on, and they can be cameras in general. The systems can be an awesome tool. So this was its date stamped there, February 22nd of this year. It was about 10 degrees, not quite, I think, that morning at 4:30, and the week before that had been about 10 degrees colder than that overnight. So if you were checking these critters at 4:30 that morning, it's a lot more fun to do that from the about 68, 70 degree temperature of your home than to be bundled up outside just to go out and see there's really nothing happening, right? So for my portion, like I said, Chris did a really nice job of getting us set up on what we might want to be thinking about here. So I've got my agenda posted here a little bit for everybody to get an idea where I'm headed with this. Going to talk through a little bit about general components of camera systems, then spend a little time on some options that people might be able to inquire. Kind of, there's some categories of how in depth you want to be with hands-on as far as how much you want to just get a ready-to-use system, or you want to pick the pieces and build it yourself. And there's lots of variability in there depending on your comfort level and what you actually want and what your goals are for the system. Chris spent a little bit of time talking about cameras. We'll do a little more of that. And then he also brought up the monitoring scenario. So we'll dig in that a little bit more and how your system kind of relates to that. So when he mentioned if you would like to be able to go back in time and see what has happened, not all the systems are created equal in their ability to be able to do that. So we'll hit on that a little bit. And then since this is Barn of Tomorrow webinar series, we'll talk a little bit about where camera technology might be headed in the future. So kind of my best outlook, my best guess on kind of where that looks from here. So and just a little bit of a note, there are too many systems, too many details. Everybody's situation is different. So we won't cover everything that's specific to you, but hopefully we give kind of an overview of lots of different things to give people things to be thinking about and how that might fit for their system. So on the components of a system, kind of the big chunks here would be the camera or cameras. And with that, Chris also mentioned, but power source is important. So not all cameras are the same in how they get powered. And depending on your facilities and your goals, that's a big piece of the puzzle to try to piece together. If you don't have power somewhere, getting that may be a substantial investment relative to the rest of the cost of the system. So it needs to fit with what your goals are and what you have again. So systems approach from that standpoint. After we have the cameras, then there's a connection from those to the system as a whole. So it can be wired or wireless. Camera monitoring systems are not a new technology, right? So they've been around for a long time. Analog or digital are kind of the options. Digital would be the newer way to do that, but there's still a lot of systems in place that use an analog signal. You can purchase barn camera systems that use an analog signal now, and you may want to do that actually in some cases, depending on what your system goals are again. But the analog cameras are cheaper, can be cheaper, but they limit you in some other regards or would cause you to have to adjust your system if you change your mind about wanting to expand later on, possibly. So after we get the connection from the camera, then we need to feed like a processor access point that takes those camera feeds, or the camera feed if you would have one, and it kind of processes that and gets it to a point where you can actually view it. So several different ways to accomplish that, but we need some way to get it to where we can see what the camera is seeing to make it worthwhile. Then, as Chris mentioned, so internet connection can play a big part depending on your goals. If you want to be able to view outside of just the local area, then the internet connection becomes critical. Um, Internet is not necessarily something that everybody would have at their barn, have had in the past. If you have that relatively close, like in a farmstead, if you have that at your house and the barn or the yard that you're trying to monitor is relatively close, there's some relatively simple ways to achieve the goal of getting internet to be able to run a system. Some people use mobile hotspot type things to get their internet. Some of those limit your ability to work with a camera system. So that's a case by case basis again, but just something to keep in mind if you think, well, I have internet now, but what you're using is a hotspot, that may not be appropriate for some of these systems. I got a handful of pictures here just to give an idea. So these couple obviously are the cameras, and tons of different cameras, tons of different things to think about what you might want with that. This box here in the top middle is a network switch. So for digital cameras, the cameras themselves are actually doing the digital processing of the images, and then they feed that into a network. Well, this network switch kind of takes several of those camera feeds and puts it onto your local network via one Ethernet cable. So it's kind of like the hub where all the cameras would connect. Got to have some cable for lots of the systems. So if they're wired, they need cable. There are some systems that are completely wireless, the cameras themselves, and they use a Wi-Fi type system generally to communicate back to their hardware that is connected to the local network. So this looks like it's the back of that network box, the network switch, but it actually is a like the processor, the video recorder, the system that is taking that video and making it something that you can view, making it available to you either on a monitor right at the house or feeding it into a local network that can get you on internet and get it elsewhere beyond just the local premise. So router, and that is how all of the different digital pieces can communicate on that local network and then get back out on the internet. So that kind of ties all of the things back together to be able to make the pieces be able to communicate. This is an image that one of the camera vendors, the system vendors, actually has available. So again, they're not all going to be the same, but this gives kind of a general overview of how those systems might work. Sorry about that. So if we look here, cameras, these are IP, and IP is internet protocol. So the digital cameras are a lot of times referenced as an IP camera. They feed into a network switch like we saw on the last slide. And then if we don't have a wired communication from like a internet router in our house to the barn that we are trying to have cameras in a system to be able to help us monitor, there are ways to do a wireless transmission of that data from the barn, from the network switch at the barn to the house or wherever the local network is that we're trying to view and or get on the internet. So those two antennas just communicate the data that would be communicated over like an Ethernet cable wirelessly. And then again, we got a router and a laptop. And there are some different ways you can go directly from like a network video recorder to a display, or you can have a network video recorder that doesn't have a display attached to it, and just everything goes through the internet to be viewed. So lots of different options, but that's kind of a general idea of where things might be at for some of these systems. So on the different options that we might have available for a system itself, you can go all the way from what some people might say is simple, all the way to people are putting together their own package and deciphering component compatibility and doing things that are probably beyond the need of a lot of folks that are just trying to monitor cows, but gives open some doors to be able to do some other things with that same information. So people talk about the Ring doorbell cameras or other like consumer type security monitoring systems that are can be sold big box stores, lots of places, anywhere you can get those kind of things. Those are kind of the would be something that you could get, and they're relatively simple to install and simple to use. They a lot of times would be the type of system that if you have no power, they may have either a battery power supply for the cameras in the cameras themselves, or some of them recharge via solar system. But they are a lot of times set up to where those cameras are communicating back to a hub on your network, with the individual cameras having a Wi-Fi connection to that hub. So that's kind of the start, and they're generally easy to install. Kind of a maybe up a notch from that in complexity, and maybe some better options potentially for folks that are trying to do a calving barn system would be a package type system that's put together by a vendor. So it'd be cameras and some of the connecting cables sometimes, the network switch or switches if they're needed, and network video recorder. So they've already done the legwork to make sure that those components are compatible and will work with each other. And then those network video recorders, they would have a software that is what you can use to view those camera feeds, or you can plug in, depending on the actual network video recorder, an HDMI cable, and display that to a TV or other monitor, and it would allow you to watch multiple, depending on the specific system, multiple cameras at once and those kind of things. So that's something on the more simple. I'm not personally familiar with the Ring doorbell, but I know some of those other more simple systems, you are essentially limited to one camera view at a time. So you can watch one, but if you want to watch your second camera, you have to turn the first one off and can't watch two at once. A lot of the kind of more the barn camera package systems would be set up with a software that allows you to watch multiple cameras at once. Then the other extreme, like I kind of touched on already pretty in depth, was that you can go all the way off the end of picking your own components and your own software to manage those pieces. And some of that is probably driven more towards people that want to do a lot more smart home integration or smart barnyard integration, or those kind of things that are taking some of that data and then using it for some other things. So gets probably into a more IT type mindset on some of that. Just a couple examples of kind of this would be one example here on the left of one of the just purchase. Those I believe are actually, they may have a little solar panel on the top. I'm not sure, either solar or battery. They might have a solar panel to recharge a battery, but battery powered cameras, and then the box that they're communicating back via Wi-Fi to get on the network. Then in the middle here would be more of a package type system that would probably be put together by a vendor in the business of supplying security systems or barn cameras. So they already did the legwork to make sure the pieces play well together. This on the right, and again, not an endorsement of anybody's product or software, but this Blue Iris software is just one example of something that can be used to for people that want to go a little more in depth and have more control to do what they want with their system. So as far as cameras themselves, I already said you can do analog or digital. So if you would have, for some reason, some older analog cameras that you think you could use, then your system needs to be able to fit those. And depending on what you want to do, look at the ability to integrate digital also. Camera resolution and image quality is a huge thing. So camera technology is amazing to me, what we can do with that, but not all cameras are created equal. So, especially as we get into some of the where we're trying to observe a bigger area, like Chris mentioned, depending on your specific situation, that camera image quality gets to be something that really is important, and that you'd want to know what you're getting into before you install or purchase a system. So, Chris also mentioned the PTZ cameras, the pan tilt zoom. So that's kind of one alternative. You can remotely change what that camera is looking at. So you can pan it side to side and tilt it up and down and zoom in and out generally, versus having one camera with a fixed mount that you may be able to zoom either digitally or optically, but you're not going to be able to pan left or right with that. So each comes with its own set of pros and cons, like most things. Uh, the more moving parts there are, the more potential there is for that to be an issue. But also sometimes it'd be really nice if there's something that you think you'd like to see that's just out of the field of view that you have, if you could move that camera slightly and see something. Um, Speaking of field of view, so there's different field of view angles basically on camera. So some can have a really wide field of view, but you may get a lot more distortion in what you're seeing. Um, Zoom. Some cameras have an optical zoom, so they're actually using some of their hardware to be able to zoom versus an all digital, and some have a combination thereof. So it's just like zooming in on your computer screen. So the image is still the same, and you're zooming in, and it's not necessarily that one is better than the other, but there are differences for people to keep in mind there. So another thing, environmental conditions. So a lot of these cameras are rated for indoor or outdoor. Most of the systems are going to have that in mind if you're buying a ready-made system for a calving barn. But even something to keep in mind for an indoor system, indoor in a calving facility is not necessarily what the rest of the world sees as indoor. So need something that's going to tolerate the conditions where you want to have the camera. Another thing, as far as environmental conditions that might be worth thinking about, is some kind of protection for those cameras. So if you have one outside, that's great, unless it's covered in snow, or if it's raining. Sometimes the lenses got water on it, might make you have to go do something about that, or resort to the old ways of going out and checking in person. So um, power supply method, we already talked about that a little bit. Night vision options. So Chris mentioned infrared, and the picture that he and I both had on our screen. So that's a black and white image, and it looks fairly clear from that angle, but there's a lot of additional white light added to that barnyard to be able to see that well. So that's another big thing. If the goal of the system is to be able to do overnight checks or checks while it's dark, then having either an alternate source of light or a camera with enough capability and enough infrared light source itself to be able to accomplish your goal is really important. So there are some ways, if you don't want to have your barnyard lit up like daytime during the night to be able to get good use out of those cameras, there are some infrared light sources that can be added that would increase the ability for those cameras to help you see during the dark hours. Chris touched on this also. So the monitoring options kind of comes down to where you want to be able to see the images and be able to monitor what you're trying to look at while you have the cameras in the barn there. So the big difference is whether you just want to be able to do that locally. So maybe from the house at the farm yard, not having to go outside overnight to check the cows at the barn versus his example of if you happen to be at a ball game or something not on site, then you need the ability to transmit that data over the internet. So big difference there, just kind of in the where at. And then, like he talked a little bit about the time dimension. So, if you want to be able to go back and view some of that data after the fact, then you need to know that as you plan and purchase and install a system. So, not all systems are going to have that ability. Um, Future looking applications. So, like all technology type things, I think we'll probably continue to see progress in the optics and the hardware development of these systems. So, better, cheaper, more data storage, all those kind of things that we get to enjoy on all of our other technologies. That should continue to happen, and have them. Then the systems are more accessible for people that are wanting to look at doing something to help them with their calving or other things. But if we kind of look maybe away from calving a little bit at where the future of this technology might go, there's a lot of buzz about artificial intelligence. I think that that will be a potentially big area where camera technology and precision agriculture can have a lot of expanse from where we're at now. Um, that artificial intelligence or the learning capability of those systems can potentially do what you would do if you're going to watch those cows. So when Chris talked about stage one, he said cows might be up and down and just kind of a little bit unsettled or those kind of things. If you watch for those behaviors of those cows, you maybe can pick out when one is getting into stage one. She's not acting like she did yesterday or those kind of things. That is something that I think AI is going to potentially be able to help people with as we continue to build down those paths. So there is actually Nikon has a live monitoring system that, to the best of my ability to find out, is still only available in Japan, but it is basically a calving camera system that monitors cows and detects calving via the images that it's capturing. Um, we had a couple weeks ago, I think, one of these webinar series webinars and talked about some sensors and some of those kind of things, precision agriculture, precision livestock things that we can do with maybe some wearable sensors or that type of thing on livestock. I think the camera technology can integrate with, or maybe some cases compete with some of those wearable sensors. So, uh, dairy seems to lead the way on a lot of these things. And if you look from a beef cow perspective, it gets a little bit different in that just physically, they generally have a lot more area to cover. So beef cows are more, they're more localized to their milking parlor or barn setting than some of those technologies maybe are easier to adapt versus needing to cover a expansive pasture type setting. But I think there's a lot of room with that AI technology to help learn some of those patterns and behaviors of those cows and look at the things like heat detection and rumination and stress or sickness potentially too. A couple pictures here just kind of for fun, and big take home message from my standpoint as far as the systems are concerned is there isn't a one size fits all. So you need to think through some of Chris's questions about what would your goals be for your system, and then try and find a system that helps you meet those objectives. I always want to know how it's going to pay for itself. So I don't know that there's a good way to identify return on investment for one of these systems. Although if you would be able to help calving, help a heifer with problems that she's having while she's calving, the calf that you may have lost has a pretty substantial value now. And even if the values aren't as high as they are now, every dollar counts in that. So you could try and pick out some sort of dollars to go with that, but it's hard to know what the alternative would have been. there's definitely something I think from a stress level or a human wellness level, return on investment there if you can do one, a better job of monitoring cows, and two, do it with less physical fatigue and mental stress. Um, that would be a good return, but hard to put a dollar value on, I think. So, and then kind of for fun, I would say entertainment factor. So animals are funny creatures, and if you have one of these systems, they can be something that you just enjoy watching their natural cow behavior. So cows act different when people are there. That's one of the issues with doing a in-person check during calving is that cow may try and hide what she has going on because that's their natural behavior is to not be an outlier from the herd, right? So if you can watch without them knowing, they can be pretty funny sometimes. One maybe just my attempt at humor is some of the systems have audio integration. So if you're going to set up a system and people are going to use it for entertainment factor, don't forget that you're on camera sometimes. Um, just kind of back through where we went in my portion of the presentation here. So talked about some of the different components, kind of different levels of how you can achieve a system, either out of the box or a vendor that puts together a component type system, or you doing all that work yourself. Different types of cameras and camera details is huge, even to the point of where you mount those. So it might sound really great to have that pan tilt zoom camera that has a tremendous amount of zoom and really incredible video quality to be able to watch that outdoor yard where you kind of have some close up stuff that's not ready to calve yet, but you're keeping an eye on them. But if you mount that on a pole or something that is not incredibly structurally sound, it's going to be really hard to see anything worthwhile while that camera's shaking in the wind and you got it zoomed to full zoom trying to look at something across the pasture. Um, Monitoring options, everybody's situation is different there, but one of the big things I think that can help folks is the ability to check without having to be in that physical location. So if I would maybe touch back on the return on investment, it might seem like this system is something that would fit better for a larger producer. I could almost argue the contrary and say the larger producer, if you're going to get 5 or 10 calves a day, you can justify more time there watching versus if you're going to get maybe a calf a day or a calf every 2 days, you spend a lot of time and effort checking in and monitoring. If you're doing that without one of these systems for not near as many calves, so maybe it's easier to justify that cost in a smaller herd even. I think the future is interesting on this topic, and I'm excited to see kind of where we go from there. So, like Chris said, think about where it fits for you. Uh, you never know what you're going to find. That little guy looks kind of like a cat, but he's a black critter with a white stripe. So, appreciate everybody's time, and we'll turn it back over to you, Dan.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And I have a few questions for you. We'll start with the one Beth posted there. Have you seen anyone using drone technology to monitor calving, or beyond that, just drone technology for monitoring cattle out on pasture?
I think there is some interest in that area. I don't have a lot to offer as far as people using that, particularly for calving monitoring. I know there's some people that do that to monitor pastures and the herd in general, but not a lot from my standpoint as far as in-depth knowledge on the calving piece.
Perfect. And then I have one going back to Chris here. When should we be thinking about getting cows into the maternity pen, especially for observing and making the most of maybe some of those camera systems? Is there any suggestions on that?
Yeah, I think it's a tough judgment call sometimes. I think once they start approaching those final 2 to 3 weeks of gestation, and hopefully you have some knowledge of that based on breeding dates and calving, expected calving dates and stuff, but sometimes you may not, and you may have to go based on physical appearance. And we're watching for things like udder development and, you know, swelling and loosening of the tissue in the vulva area, relaxation of pelvic ligaments, those types of things. But I'd love to have them in for closer observation, in those last 2 to 3 weeks anyway of gestation. Um, Keep in mind if you're using calving ease bulls on heifers, part of that calving ease equation is gestation length, and so they'll often come a week or two early, and so plan that, I guess, plan accordingly into your scheduling and your sorting.
I would add just one quick thing on that, Dan, that I think I've heard from some folks that part of the biggest benefit of the system is helping them decide when it's time to get somebody in. So it depends on what your in scenario is, but that stage one where it may be a drawn out process, but you're seeing some of the early signs is a place where if you're doing pretty frequent observation, you can see that ahead of time and know which two or one or whoever may be next to actually go into the maternity pen.
Yeah. Chris made me feel bad there for a second. I'm like, I never grew up with enough maternity pen space to get anywhere near a couple of weeks of lead time. If it was in the pen when it had a calf, that was a success. Okay, and then I think we have a question there, sort of weather related. How cold can it get before outside before camera performance is impacted? But I think even beyond that, how do we think about where to put cameras so that they don't get splattered with manure? Or are there cameras that have NASCAR dust shields so I can just rip the plastic off the lens? What are some of the things that we do to try and make maintenance just a little more manageable on these things?
Um, that's a case by case again, but there are some cameras that are better suited for an outdoor environment. And I don't know that I can specifically state which one, but I think there are some with some heating elements or things to be able to thaw like frost or frozen snow, rain stuff off of their optical lens. But in a dusty, dirty calving barn, it may just be part of your maintenance program to give those lenses a cleaning from time to time. So, and as far as kind of otherwise outdoor protection, a little bit of a roof shelter can go a long way. So you see some tucked up under an eave or something looking out front of a barn. That can go a long way towards keeping some of that water off the lens.
So that's one of the more challenging aspects of some camera systems, probably at the one that I didn't have to deal with for my daughter in the house, right? That makes it a little bit different. The other one I was hoping to get maybe a little bit more information on is how challenging of a topic is sort of connectivity and getting onto the internet with some of these systems. We had a camera called the Owlet, and the days that it didn't work while I was in my house with good network, I found extremely frustrating. What's sort of that like in the countryside, and what are some things we can do there that maybe help facilitate that?
Um, so that's going to be a system dependent thing. So if you truly are concerned about ability to have that access and not worry about outside network connectivity, some of those systems where you are truly only viewing the information on your local network or the analog systems even function similarly, where it doesn't have to go out to the internet to be able to be viewed. Because just like you said, Dan, there are some systems where you're on site and just because there's no the connection is poor, you can't see while you're there. There are some other systems that you could have no internet connection and still be able to view the images just on your local network.
Mhm. And then I'm going to try and hold you to this one. Did you look up what any system costs might be, rough ranges? Certainly, it depends on the system you're selecting, but sort of a starter to maybe, obviously, the upper end is unlimited depending on what you want to put into it, but just a starter end might cost.
I'll kick off, and then if you want to add something, you sure can, Chris. But you can for a couple $300 get a camera and a kind of starter system without a lot of trouble. And if you want more of a what I would call more of a like security based system or more of a monitoring type system that is one of those with the network video recorder and you can view the multiple cameras at a time at the same time. a couple $1,000s would go a long way towards getting a handful of cameras with one of those also. And then, like you said, you can on up the scale from there. And that's a lot of those are purchased as a self install. So if you were going to hire somebody to install for you, then that adds on also, of course. Or if you needed the, like I mentioned, power at the barn or some of those kind of things would be in addition. But yeah, I don't know if that's high or low, but maybe not as high as it seems like it would be for some of the benefit that you might get.
Perfect. Thank you. I think we made it to the end of the questions, but if you do have another question, be sure to type it into the chat. Otherwise, I think it's time for me to do my spiel for next time. Hopefully my screen is sharing there. So next webinar will be on September 30th, and that will be our final one in this series. And we're going to have Dr. Brett Ramirez back to talk about preparing for winter and minimum ventilation. And while it's pretty nice out this week, that time period isn't that far in the future. So now is the time to start thinking about and preparing to that for that. If you or a friend you know missed the webinar today, you can find them on our YouTube channel at Barn of Tomorrow. Or if you would like a copy of the presentation slides, if you just Google Barn of Tomorrow, hopefully that'll take you to our Iowa State website there, and you can get a PDF copy of the slides. So with that, once again, big thanks to Tony and Chris for talking through some of their experiences and the options of camera monitoring technology and how that relates to taking care of our cattle to make the best opportunities of those calving seasons. Greatly appreciate it, and greatly appreciate all of you for taking the time to attend today. If you have questions for our speaker, feel free to send them an email, and I'm sure they will do their best to address them. Otherwise, thanks everyone, and have a great rest of your day. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Tony. Really appreciate it. I thought that was great.
Thank you, Dan.